Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another Stop BS Now English classroom. Today is April 17th, I believe. We are here in Corona World, Canada. Police walking with their dogs on the streets, looking for trouble, I suppose. Yes, welcome to Corona World. Today we're looking at The Great Gatsby, popular novel in high schools, often in grade 11 or 12. America's great novel, sometimes considered such. I will argue that it cannot be taught in classrooms. Not because some silly words, the N-word, the F-word. No, you won't find anything like that in The Great Gatsby. But it really should not be taught in high schools for a number of reasons. First, it's too complicated. I will spend some 20 minutes at the end of this class explaining the first 2 or 3 pages. And other reasons? Well, it's far too devastating critique of the world we live in. It is revolutionary, as all good literature is, and revolutions do not start in classrooms. No, our schools are bastions of the status quo, arms of the state. They will never encourage real revolutions. I'm not talking about the fake one that was nearly begun by the carbon environmentalists, the global warming scam artists. But let's have a look at my first point. The Great Gatsby can never be taught properly in schools like all great modern novels. It is a condemnation of modern life and of the world that all our schools serve to uphold and perpetuate. It is a condemnation of every aspect of modern life, but especially of its ruling class, the wealthy elites, who are the gods of the modern world. Or rather, they are that special class that is drunk on power and possession. America, where class-based criticism is taboo and censored, scholars will deny that. Fitzgerald was a critic of America's most successful class. However, the evidence speaks to us on every page. None of his wealthy, privileged characters know how to communicate. I could spend a whole day talking about the lack of communication skills displayed and exhibited, much to my amusement, by Fitzgerald. Not by Fitzgerald, but by the characters Fitzgerald produced. They have no conscience, and none of those characters know how to make anyone, themselves included, happy. They are in the business of buying apartments, buying puppies, buying great estates. And I can attest that that is not the route to happiness. I live humbly here. What else do they lack? Tom Buchanan, like J.D. Rockefeller, that great American icon, patronizes the poor, giving them small change and a heart full of contempt. I dare say, our shadowy leader, Bill Gates, is no different. He can hardly suppress his chuckles when he speaks of vaccinating the whole world. Yes, Let's discuss the Valley of Ashes a bit. I believe it's described somewhat in the opening pages of chapter 2, very obscure and almost mystical, as the narrator would make it, but he's hardly able to disguise the fact that it's not a pleasant place to be. What is the Valley of Ashes? It is the hell to which the working class is condemned. In America, just about anywhere. To this day, the poor, and especially non-whites, are forced to live near the industrial infrastructure that poisons life on this planet. The ruling class is not entirely spared, but you won't see 5G towers and smokestacks on the White House lawns or on the vast estates of the elites. I think that's a valid point. Again, not one you will hear in classrooms. And of course, one might add that this also applies to the great manner in which our Canadian Prime Minister resides when he's not at his cottage escaping the corona drama. Ultra-wealthy Tom Buchanan is a cruel, greedy, racist, stupid bully, as well as a tyrant and a manipulator of the American justice system. I think we may have noticed that after the death of Myrtle, an incompetent police officer came to investigate, and Tom exerted his will upon him. I think the narrator was discreet about that moment, about that influence. I think we can infer a much more sinister influence beyond just a friendly, large hand on the police officer's shoulder. I don't remember the details exactly. Does this apply to the present day? Well, goodness, of course it applies to the present day. How would students know that? How would teachers know that? There are no courses to study the influence of the upper class on the justice system, the economic system. So that element of the novel, that dimension of the novel, tends to be ignored. Teachers only teach what they have been taught to teach. Sorry if I'm making the Great Gatsby a little too relevant. F. Scott Fitzgerald couldn't have been a critic of the rich because he partied with them. That is a fallacious argument. Participation does not preclude criticism. My personal experience testifies to this. Out of desperation, I worked briefly for the movie industry that I hated and continue to hate, with few exceptions. Coincidentally, economic desperation also drove Fitzgerald to work for the movie industry, so he doubtlessly hated it. Can't help remembering or recalling the words of Catcher in the Rye's narrator as he accused his elder brother of being a prostitute for Hollywood. I think that implied the author's personal distaste for the media, especially the entertainment media, but the news media. just another arm of the wealthy. One might also argue I use computers, therefore I must be supportive of technology. On the contrary, I am a critic of all technologies. I'm given little choice but to use them, which I do, mostly carefully, as everyone should. I've recently done some reading in this wonderful book. I don't usually, there we go. Highly recommend it. What was F. Scott's opinion of technology? Automobiles and motorized boats are central to The Great Gatsby. They serve no good purpose in this book, which I assume reflects Fitzgerald's opinion of automobiles, and by extension, represent his opinion of technology in general. What was Fitzgerald's opinion of the role of women in America? He gave his leading female character the name Daisy, the name of a flower that has little or no nutritional or medicinal uses. In a narrow sense, it is useless to us. But she is pretty, a flower. Flowers, when considered separate from the roots and leaves that give them life, are little more than the sexual organs of plants. This implies that Daisy is a sex object. This explains why after she had a child, Tom appears to have lost interest in her. Reproduction, growth, and nature have no role in Tom's life. Although ironically, he appears to be in the business of breeding racehorses. That seems to be how he makes his money. Can't be sure exactly where his money came from. I think he's not a self-made billionaire. He represents the old wealth of the East Egg. The West Egg, in contrast, where Gatsby resides, represents that class of new wealth. One might compare this schism to the one that continues to exist today, or not a comparison here, but what's the word? Identify that same schism today by noting that we have a very, let us say, publicly visible group of elites who have made their millions and billions from the technology sector. Gates, Bezos, and who's the other billionaire who's presently putting 5G satellites and drones into space, some 20,000. These men and others represent the new elites, the newly made billionaires. Whereas those old families, the Warburgs, Whartons, Rockefeller, Rothschilds, represent the old wealth, those whose families have resided at the top of our political and economic world for more than one generation. In The Great Gatsby, these two groups appear to be hostile, and Tom shows no interest in working with Gatsby. Obviously, this is a personally motivated, since he's aware that Gatsby may be prowling, fishing for his wife. However, in our present time, there is no such conflict. They seem to be working in concert with the old wealth in the background, in shadows mostly, and the new wealth, men like Gates foremost, being quite happy to parade in public, act as if he is our Savior and Lord. Now, let's consider Nick, our narrator. He is a bondman. What does that mean? It likely referred to the tradition of governments printing bonds to fund their wars, and to the habit of allowing private firms to sell war bonds to wealthy elites who earn profits, essentially by supporting the war with their money, while the lower classes pour out their blood, on battlefields around the world. In short, Nick is scum. Nick is the reason Gatsby and millions of others wasted their potential for love on for-profit wars. Wars for the profit of the wealthy. Nick portrays himself as something of a scholar and intellectual, but a close analysis of his words will reveal that Fitzgerald portrayed him as a vain, classist, lying piece of wealthy white trash. Let's have some fun and analyze a couple pages. Nick Carraway, or Careless, begins here with a short paragraph. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Here he begins to portray himself as a very thoughtful person. His thoughts are really limited to his father's words thus far. But let's consider this choice of words, vulnerable. In what way was he vulnerable, and how is this relevant to the introduction? Was he abused at that time? Neglected? Doubtlessly, all children in the upper class most children tend to be neglected, especially among the upper class, where everything is outsourced, parenting included. Although we've made that model the middle class and the global model. Parents no longer have anything to teach their children. And I believe our dear government has recently encouraged children to dismiss arguments made by parents regarding COVID-19. Yes, the government will undermine family harmony and tell children how to think. Nevertheless, let's continue. Wherever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. That sounds like a very considerate bit of wisdom. Sounds like he means, Nick, always remember that you were born into a privileged life, to an upper middle class family, and not everyone, the minority really, the majority does not have access to such privileges. However, we'll soon see that Nick's father had no such wisdom in mind. He meant something quite disturbing. Nevertheless, paragraph 3, he didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way. Communicative in a reserved way. Is that a contradiction? Does that make any sense? Reserved means to not speak, to be reticent, to not communicate. So there's no sense here. And I understood that he meant a great deal more than that. He understood, or he assumed. In consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments. That also sounds like a friendly, amiable, considerate quality, not to go around judging people. At least not misjudging people, or not cruelly judging people. However, as the next line shows, there is no truth to this. He does plenty of judging. A habit that has opened up many curious natures to me. Many curious natures. Curious natures. This sounds like a loaded word, this word, curious. It's like calling someone's book interesting. A very flexible word in our language. Curious natures, not even intriguing people. No, curious natures. They're not people, they are natures. And also made me the victim of not a few veteran bores. This sounds very judgmental. People apparently have come to Nick to share their private, personal tragedies, and he calls them veteran bores. Of course, he's calling them that in his mind. He reserves his judgments verbally, but not mentally. So one never knows what he's thinking. The abnormal mind is quick to detect and attach itself to this quality, his wonderfully reserved quality, when it appears in a normal person like him, yes. The abnormal mind, those others, not him. And so it came about that in college, I was unjustly accused of being a politician because I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. This makes no sense. Politicians are not privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. He must have mistaken. He must be mistaken. This must be a malapropism. Politician should have been the word priest or psychologist, close friend. There is something priest-like about our narrator, Nick Carraway. Most of the confidences were unsought. He was not interested, or of course he wasn't seeking them. Frequently I have feigned sleep, preoccupation, or hostile levity when I realized some unmistakable sign that an intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon. In other words, when Nick sensed or noticed that someone was interested in sharing personal griefs, personal stories with him, he avoided the moment, he avoided that unpleasantness by what? Pretending to be sleepy or even asleep, pretending to be busy, preoccupied, or just dealing with these people with hostile levity, I would say perhaps sarcasm with a smile. something like that. Just not taking these people seriously, joking about their troubles. Perhaps that's what he meant by hostile levity. For the intimate revelations of young men, or at least the terms in which they express them, are usually plagiaristic. Well, yes, we all have a habit of resorting to cliches and idioms when we are emotional. That is no reason to dismiss people who make personal confessions, sharing personal griefs. He also says they are marred by obvious suppression. Interesting how he would know that people sharing personal stories are actually censoring their stories. Reserving judgment is a matter of infinite hope. Here's a piece of nonsense. I'm being polite. Reserving judgment is a piece. You're not reserving judgment. Number one, Nick. Stop the BS. And infinite hope. Hope for what? That people will not censor themselves. People will avoid you in the future. I'm still a little afraid of something. Sorry, I'm still a little afraid of missing something if I forget that, as my father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat. Sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. Really? Now here, he is repeating his father's earlier wisdom about his privileged life. But the sense here has, or the connotation has changed quite a bit. The word snobbishly, snobbery and snob, these are not flattering words. They imply that Nick is classist, in living in contempt of those who are not as privileged as he is. The fundamental decencies are parceled out unequally at birth. Also suggests that he hasn't simply inherited economic privileges. No, he's inherited genetic advantages, superiority. This is old-fashioned. This is the old-fashioned or the old philosophy of the aristocracy, nobility throughout the world, but that was supposed to be banished from the United States thanks to the revolution. The reality is quite different. There are plenty of elites who still think, I suspect, that they are not only racially, but somehow genetically superior, not only to people of different color, but to people of different economic status. Let's try one more paragraph, shall we? And after boasting this way of my tolerance, there's no tolerance here, Nick. This is a joke. The man is judgmental and intolerant. Maybe that's not the right word for him either, but he's certainly not loving. I come to the admission that my tolerance has a limit. Conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes, but at a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on. conduct, maybe founded on wonderful metaphors, but what is he talking about? Not Christianity, not any religion, not communist principles. Could it be capitalism? Perhaps. When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform and at a sort of moral attention forever. He came back from the East. The East? In capital? That's rather vague. There is no geographic area that I know of that is referred to as simply the East. We do often speak of the Middle East or the Far East. In any case, he appears to have come back from World War I, as other passages in the novel attest. He should have said then he came back from Europe, perhaps North Africa, possibly the Middle East. The East? This is simply evidence that Nick is clueless about geography, is poorly educated, and this is one of the inside jokes of The Great Gatsby, that we have these elites like Tom Buchanan and Nick Carraway who have been educated in the best American universities and know nothing worth repeating. But in this sense, they are also, this ignorance has been distributed, spread into the larger populace, which now is all privileged to receive a very similar education. So much so that apparently many Canadians, Americans, I have seen little surveys done in America demonstrating that many Americans, I think the majority of Americans, can't locate Yemen, Iraq, Iran, Libya on a map. Yet these are the countries which their military, which they fund, is busy ruining, are busy ruining. Just a bizarre state of affairs that people would throw their money into a system that wages war on countries that they know nothing about, honestly. Nothing more than what the media wishes to tell them. And apparently the media is not interested in, not even interested in telling people where these countries are. Or perhaps no one's interested in watching the media anymore. Perhaps I'm too optimistic. Only Gatsby. Sorry, let's jump ahead a bit. I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform, at a sort of moral attention forever. What kind of uniform? Not really important. I suppose he meant military uniform. Standing at attention, at moral attention. What does that mean? These are deliberately phrased bits of nonsense that are meant to make a mockery of our elite narrator, Nick Carraway. And yes, he is elite. He is very privileged. I don't know many people who are employed in the bond business. It is not even something you can study in universities. It is what should we call it? The deep economy, the deep state. The deep state economy. Standing at moral attention, everyone in uniform. This sounds like he's dreaming about living in Nazi Germany, the world that is coming to all of us as I speak. I wanted no more riotous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. No more riotous excursions, no more wild parties. I'm not a fan of them myself, but it's a necessary vent for all the stress our world produces. It's the one way people are able to enjoy themselves a little. And yes, as I mentioned, we are entering that world in which even that is not permitted. I believe here in this wonderful country, parties are now also illegal. I await the day when political parties are made illegal. That would be a bit of wisdom. Privileged glimpses into the human heart. Yeah, he's sick of that. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. His disgust, his intolerance. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have unaffected scorn. Okay. You scorn everything he represents, but he's exempt. From what? This makes no sense. It's meant to be senseless. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, what kind of silly definition is this? Then there was something gorgeous about him, about Gatsby. But Gatsby, by this definition, has no personality. He does not have an unbroken series of successful gestures. His attempt to recapture Daisy is a failure, tragic failure. So by Nick's definition, Gatsby has no personality. Of course, this makes little sense. On the other hand, I'm tempted to agree. Gatsby is a very hollow character, but for that matter, so is Nick. So is virtually everyone in this novel. I say virtually, I think maybe I should say everyone. There was something gorgeous about him. Gorgeous, what a silly word to apply to a man's life. Some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life. Some heightened self-delusion about the promises of life. That would be more correct. As if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. No, that is not Gatsby. Gatsby is insensitive. He is blind. He has no senses and no mind to organize what his senses tell him. He's not aware that Daisy is not worth pursuing. He's not aware that he's wasting his money and time and his life. Couldn't be more insensitive, in some senses, about his, in one sense, insensitive to his own situation, his own world, and more literally insensitive to the world beyond his world, that of the lower classes, the working class, not to mention also the suffering that exists within the upper class, self-induced suffering, but nevertheless suffering. All right, let's skip the end of that sentence. This responsiveness had nothing to do with that flabby impressionality. What on earth does this combination of words mean? Flabby impressionality, which is dignified under the name of creative temperament. It was an extraordinary gift for hope. Indeed, Gatsby is full of hope, but it does not do him justice. It does not serve him well. Hope is his delusion, a romantic readiness such I have never found in any other person, and which it is not likely I shall ever find again. I don't think Nick is looking carefully enough. The virus of blind hope is the norm in America, in fact, in the world. People continue to hope that their governments will take care of them, their doctors will take care of them, that progress will come to them, that their hard work will be rewarded. And of course, that hope is founded on ignorance of history and ignorance of the present and of the future to which we appear to be marching in lockstep and lockdown. No, Gatsby turned out all right in the end. No one can read this without realizing that the narrator is, to put it politely, unreliable, untrustworthy, an idiot, deliberately deceptive. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what dust, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams. It is wonderful poetry with little meaning. The wake of his dreams that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. So I guess that means due to the foul dust, due to the, not sure what that means, whatever it means, it caused Nick to lose interest in humanity, the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. That is the common fate of humanity. Abortive sorrows, why abortive? Just sorrows and short-winded elations. That I can make sense of. A little further ahead before I quit, my family have been prominent, well-to-do people in the middle western city. In this middle western city? What is a middle western city? Nick. In America, we speak of the Midwest. Middle Western, that is not a geographic designation in any part of the world. The Caraways are something of a clan, no doubt. As a clan or the tribe, they do not share with other clans and tribes. And we have a tradition that we're descended from the Dukes of Bakliok. I think this is an actual family with English history, although the name sounds Germanic. Perhaps that was meant to remind us that, or to allude to the fact that British royalty are actually Germanic royalty. That's another story. But the actual founder of my line was my grandfather's brother, who came here in 1851. Yes, during the Civil War, around that time, and sent a substitute to the Civil War and started the wholesale hardware business that my father carries on today. All right. Sent a substitute to the Civil War. Nick has no criticism or conscience on that point. Apparently, for him, it's fine for the wealthy to avoid military service by paying others to do their duty. And yet Nick wishes us to believe, wants us to believe that he was or participated in World War I. I think there have been a few American elites who have peddled that lie in order to garner political advantage and public support. I never saw this great uncle, but I'm supposed to look like him, with special reference to the rather hard-boiled painting that hangs in Father's office. Father with a capital, okay. I graduated from New York, New Haven in 1915, just a quarter of a century after my father. And a little later, I participated in that delayed Teutonic migration known as the Great War, World War I. Delayed Teutonic migration. What on earth is he talking about? To describe World War I as a migration? Huh. As I recall, yes, Jewish people did migrate, to use the term loosely, to Poland, concentration camps. But that's not on Nick's mind, is it? Jews are not Teutonic. Who are the Teutons? Germans? Germanic peoples? I'm just trying to digest this now, but could he perhaps be referring to Operation Paperclip, in which thousands of Teutonic German scientists, psychopathic scientists, were shipped secretly from Germany to America, where they contributed to military projects, very nefarious ones. Possibly. That is, oh wait, I'm in the wrong war. Isn't that funny? Well, World War I did also result in an influx of Europeans, but I'm not an expert on this. In any case, Nick has misrepresented World War I, talks a lot of nonsense, has done his best to reveal his monstrous self as politely and subtly as possible. Of course, all this gets overlooked in most readings. I have not found anyone who has influenced my reading. I do read widely, but I have a master's degree in literature. Learned nothing during my master's degree, nothing worth sharing. So I suspect this lecture will be unique, perhaps eye-opening. Obviously, I can't do the entire novel in depth, page by page. This will have to do. I hope it's been fun. I wish everyone good health and freedom from tyranny. Good night. Good morning. Not sure what time it is where you are, but this is the right time.